Hello, I'm Wendy. Today we're painting autumn woods in watercolour and using some sponge techniques. Painting with sponges in watercolour is not always as easy as some people make it look. You need to have a practice before you start, and I have been practicing. And I've put out here a selection of some of the sponges that I use. I've got quite a selection here. Some of them are natural sponges, and I bought a few small packets over the last few years, and some of them are just kitchen sponges. As you can see, some of them have had quite a bit of use. They're the ones that I've found work better for me. What I suggest you do is dig out the ones that you've got, and even if you've not got the natural sponges, you don't need them. You can see what kitchen sponges you've got, cut them into little pieces and have a go. And coming up next in the video, I'll show you what I was doing with my practicing session. This is where all those scraps of watercolour paper that you've cut off from larger pictures comes in useful, or the backs of paintings that you regard as failures, because you do need to practice on the watercolour paper that you're going to use. Now, I have found this really difficult, I must say, because as I said in the introduction, it's not as easy as it looks, and I made the mistake starting out of not mixing up enough paint. I have painted with sponges before, and I'll give you a link to some of the ones that I've got out on my channel. But it was a while back, and I've sort of forgotten how much paint you really do need to mix up. I'm practicing just using a mix of burnt sienna because, well, it's a colour you're going to use in the autumn paintings, and it's not an expensive colour, and it's easy to mix up. I mixed up some burnt sienna, possibly with a little bit of light red, I think, and if you wanted to get something a bit darker, you could put a bit of burnt umber in there. So the video here really speaks for itself, doesn't it? I'm just practicing using a few different sponges and using different concentrations of paint. If it's thicker, clearly you're going to get a darker mark. Now here, this is a bit of regular kitchen sponge. It was cut sort of deliberately, sort of rectangular shape, which clearly doesn't lend itself very well to painting leaves. So with some scissors, I just cut around some of the shapes, the angular shapes, to make it more rounded, and it seems to work okay. So I'm just basically carrying on here with the different sponges and the different mixers. And as you can see, you do need a lot. I'm using a little dropper there to add some water. There's no easy way to explain it. You've basically got to do what I'm doing and do some practicing. And you'll find that the more watery the paint is, you'll get the broader, less textured marks. If you do a thicker mix and you don't press on as much, you'll get some more, as I've got here, some of the bittier sort of marks that you can get, a bit more textural if you like. So I'm carrying on here and using, this is a natural sponge with very large sort of spaces in it. I didn't like these very much. It could just have been me. If you've got them, do practice more with them and see if you do like them. I wasn't that keen. So I was carrying on using the different sponges, as you can see. In the end, I did pick a couple that I liked, and it's up to you to decide the ones that you like. I preferred the natural sponge in the selection that I got, and really quite a small sponge as well. Too large a sponge is going to soak up too much paint. You're going to put out your paint, use your sponge, and find you've got no paint left. And also I washed the sponge between applications, clearly changing colour. Didn't want it too wet, so I dried it on some tissue before I went into the next colour. That's the way I sort of worked out was the best way for me to use them, but I could have continued forever doing this practicing, but sometime you've got to stop. Find the ones that you like the best and then have a go at the painting. This was one of the first attempts that I did using the autumn colours, and the one or two of the sponges that I decided I liked to use, it was really a practice session, and before I put the tree trunks in, it was a total mess. And but that wasn't the point. I was practicing. It wasn't going to turn into a picture or anything. But once I'd done it, and I just put a few of the tree trunks in there, I rather liked it, to be honest. If you're not a messy painter and you like to render lots and lots of detail, I don't think this video is going to be for you. But if you don't mind making a mess and being quite experimental, then I think what you'll find is that you can make these sponge marks, and they look terrible at a certain stage, but once you start tightening up the picture by putting some of the details in of the branches and the tree trunks, it sort of starts to make sense and can look really quite interesting and attractive, I think. There are certain design principles I think you've got to bear in mind, and one of them is being too busy all over the size of the paper that you're working on. If everywhere is the same busyness, it's not going to work. And I think just what worked for me here was leaving some of the white paper. I don't think it was white, I think it was a very light blue or purple, but leaving some of that, and particularly around the tree, it gave it a focal point, and having the tonal contrast, which is really important when you're putting the sponge work on. Don't have it all the same tone, have some darks and lights in there. So your darks and lights, and this area that was different and not as busy, I think made the picture work. I think I was quite lucky because they were really random marks that were put on there. I'd got an idea of the composition, but I think it just worked out quite nicely, and I was quite pleased with it. So I thought, well, I didn't record this obviously because it was just an experimental piece, but I thought I'll try and do something along those lines for the video to give you some idea of how the sponge work can be very effective when it's put together with the darks of the trees and the branches. It was a very simple composition with just the main tree, which would be the focal point, and then another tree a little bit further back with a different shape. So you've got lots of different shapes going on here. I took the idea from one or two of my autumn photographs. And then I started off by doing a very, very light wash, and it does have to be very light. In this case, I used, as you can see, a sort of light purpley colour, probably mixed from ultramarine with a touch of alizarin or a little bit of light red. It's too easy to go very dark here, or a lot darker than you really want. So if you want to try and get that nice light effect in the background, be very careful at this stage. Just, if in doubt, then just stain the paper. And as usual, I'm not being too particular about where I do this. I'm trying to keep things random. And also I do like to cover the paper, all the paper, with a wash to get rid of the white. I can't paint against white, pure white areas. I like to have some tones in there. And generally I look for the colours that are in the reference and put the lightest colours that I can see down first. So starting off with the sponge work, I thought I would put down some of the lightest colours. I was using as a reference for the colours a couple of photographs that I'd taken. I will put them up so you can just see, but I wasn't copying any of them. I was just getting some ideas for the colours. And there were, at this time of year, which is sort of mid-October, there's still a lot of green about, and there were some light greens. So I'm putting a little bit of light green in there, and now I'm coming in with the burnt sienna. You can use burnt sienna on its own. If you wanted to get it a bit brighter, you've got the options of adding some cadmium orange, light red. These are the colours that on my palette that I'm using. So we've got the light greens, and then the burnt siennas, to give the first coats here. You can see it can be very wet, and some areas I'm putting in with a bit more texture. What I work sometimes is, as I'm working, if I want a bit more paint or something like that, you can squeeze the sponge, which is what I did there, to get a little bit more paint. It can puddle, but you can pull it out again. But try squeezing the sponge as well. What I found there was you can get more darks. If you're looking for darks, if you squeeze the sponge, possibly now as I'm doing here, then you can see that you're getting some darks in there. I wanted to keep the foreground less busy than the top part of the picture, the foliage. So I'm putting on just the sponge work. I'm trying to leave some areas that are not worked very much in the foreground. And they're random marks. I've not got a big plan in mind. As I said, it's just to keep some of the area not quite as busy as the top area. So I switched to a rigger just for a little bit of detail work in the foreground, because that meant that it would come forwards and we'd get a bit of distance in the picture. But I didn't do very much at all. I think this was almost the only rigger work I did on the foliage, apart from, well, then I used the rigger again for the trees and the branches. There was quite a lot of green, as I said, at this time of year. I used indigo with a warm yellow mainly for the green. I've become a bit of a fan of indigo recently. It does make some nice greens. And I'm trying to get some texture in there and being careful to leave some spaces. I didn't leave that many spaces, but I was particularly keen on leaving that space around the main tree on the left. As in the first practice piece, I thought that worked quite well. So I am leaving, as you can see, I am leaving that area. And really, the sponge work is going on quite randomly. I could do 10 of these and they'd all be different. So you get to this stage when you're trying to vary the colours and vary the tones, and you don't get disheartened because you look at it and you think, gosh, this is a mess. But it will come together. Yes, I did do a little bit more work here, didn't I? Just I think it dried back. The browns will dry back, and I did want to get some tonal contrast in the foreground here. I started putting in the branches with my quill brush, which I've mentioned before, which is a lovely brush. There's links in the description box if you think it might be the brush for you. And I'm using a mixture again, similar to the foreground, with burnt umber and a little bit of ultramarine and possibly a bit of indigo. You don't want to have these browns too black, and so be careful on using the ultramarine, because that will make things black. And I'm sort of intertwining the trunks and the branches between the greens. I have speeded this up, you might have noticed, I do paint quickly, but this not this quickly, and this is speeded up ×2. Otherwise it might get a bit boring. I'm not going the darkest dark on that first wash. What I will do then is drop in something even darker. That way you can judge your darks as well. Don't put them in, well, I don't like to put them in the final tone all at once. Do something a bit lighter and then you can drop them in wet into wet. You can get some quite nice textural effects sometimes by doing that. Now on this one I got quite a big space there in the middle, and I thought we'd accentuate the distance by putting in some lighter trees. And again, you can see now using the rigger, once you start putting some branches over these this sponge work, it sort of integrates. It all integrates all together, doesn't it? And it seems to start making more sense. Hopefully. Well, I hope you think that anyway. I really enjoy working like this. It's quite experimental, and you don't need to worry too much. You can leave it at that stage. Sorry, this little bit is a bit blurred. For some reason it was out of focus. You can leave it at that stage, clearly, but I felt it was lacking something. I felt it needed a bit more dark and a bit more detail in places. So I'm using a stronger green here and placing the darker greens mainly on the top edge of the picture and the canopy of the trees, which I think can usually work pretty well. And here I'm just finishing off some of the trees and the branches with the rigger. I found I needed to reinforce one or two. Again, it's just adjusting the tones and the darks. And if there are some large patches of, say, a green, then just put a little bit of more of the branch showing through, and it breaks the large shape up. I thought I'd just put a few autumn leaves on there. When you're out walking in the woods, you often see the leaves falling, and I forget to do that, but I think it's quite a nice touch is to do that, and especially with this nice burnt sienna in there, adds a nice little touch of something a bit brighter and orangey in the picture. So this was my final picture. Off camera, I did add one or two more little branches on the right hand side to break up some of the blocks of green there. I do hope that you enjoyed it, and I do hope that you have a go at doing some sponge painting. The main thing is practice and then don't give up. Just make sure that you get those nice tones of those trees and the branches in there. Anyway, if you did enjoy, do subscribe to my channel, and then you won't miss anything I've got coming up in the future. Bye for now.